For 10,000 years, there had been one law no civilization had ever dared to challenge. It was older than kingdoms, older than the oldest stars mapped by sentient hands, and whispered across the galaxy with the same quiet certainty as gravity itself. When the Eternal Empire demanded tribute, you paid. Every world knew the stories. Entire civilizations had vanished after uttering a single word of defiance. Ancient oceans had been boiled into clouds of steam. Planetary capitals had been reduced to glowing scars visible from orbit. The names of those who resisted survived only as warnings carved into the memory of history itself. Across countless inhabited systems, children grew up believing that resistance was not courage, it was extinction. Then the Imperial summons arrived at Earth. The transmission cut through every communications network in the solar system with flawless precision. It interrupted news broadcasts, scientific conferences, military exercises, classroom lectures, and even private conversations aboard deep space mining stations drifting beyond Neptune. Every screen flickered black before revealing the same towering figure seated upon an immense obsidian throne, surrounded by banners stitched from the flags of conquered civilizations. Behind the throne stretched an endless chamber illuminated by cold blue light, where armored guardians stood perfectly motionless like statues carved from living metal. The Emperor never raised his voice. He never needed to. By decree of the Eternal Empire, the translated message echoed in every human language: the species designated humanity is hereby recognized as an imperial tributary state. Deliver your assigned resources, industrial production, and population quota within one standard cycle. Compliance ensures survival. Refusal ensures removal. The message ended without negotiation. No threats. No anger. Only certainty. Across Earth, silence followed. In New York, traffic slowed as thousands stared upward at giant holographic displays hanging between skyscrapers. In the crowded markets of Lagos, conversations dissolved into uneasy whispers. Scientists aboard lunar observatories exchanged nervous glances while enormous telescopes pivoted toward the edge of the solar system, searching for ships they already feared were there. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, naval command centers shifted to maximum alert, their walls glowing crimson as encrypted warnings flooded every console. Even on the rust-red plains of Mars, construction crews stopped operating towering fusion cranes, removing their helmets just long enough to watch the recording replay across colony skies. Nobody celebrated first contact anymore. Not after hearing those words. Inside government bunkers, military commanders studied archived intelligence collected over decades from distant civilizations that had escaped imperial conquest. Every report described the same impossible machine. A civilization that did not invade because it was angry. It invaded because tribute was simply how the universe was supposed to work. Entire species existed only to feed its endless expansion. Every conquered world paid with minerals, technology, labor, or its own children. Every refusal ended exactly the same way. Extinction. The weight of that history settled over humanity like an approaching storm. Some leaders argued for negotiation. Others demanded immediate surrender. Many simply stared at the stars, wondering if every achievement humanity had ever made, every city, every colony, every dream stretching from Earth to Saturn, had only been a brief pause before inevitable conquest. Then, somewhere deep inside Earth's secure defense network, a response was drafted. It contained no speech. No explanation. No plea for mercy. 3 words. Come and collect. For the first time in thousands of years, the Eternal Empire encountered something it had never prepared for. A species that answered tribute, with war. For generations, humanity had worn the mask of a peaceful civilization. To distant observers, the solar system looked prosperous but unremarkable, a cluster of thriving colonies linked by commerce, scientific discovery, and diplomatic restraint. Earth shimmered beneath ribbons of orbital habitats that glittered like artificial constellations. Mars had become a world of sprawling crimson cities protected beneath transparent atmospheric domes. Vast agricultural cylinders rotated silently between Earth and Jupiter, feeding billions with forests and oceans suspended inside colossal rings. Merchant vessels drifted peacefully through carefully monitored trade corridors, while explorers disappeared into the darkness beyond Pluto in search of knowledge rather than conquest. To the rest of the galaxy, humans appeared curious, ambitious, but harmless. That illusion had been carefully cultivated. Far beyond civilian shipping lanes, hidden inside the fractured heart of the asteroid belt, entire mountains were hollowed into secret shipyards where no public registry existed. Fusion forges burned day and night, their white-hot light reflecting across unfinished hulls stretching for kilometers. Swarms of construction drones danced through the vacuum with mechanical precision, assembling warships layer by layer without ever transmitting a detectable signal. Beneath the frozen crust of Europa, military laboratories tested technologies that officially did not exist. Deep inside Saturn's magnificent rings, stealth carriers rested in absolute silence, their adaptive hulls blending perfectly with the surrounding ice and rock. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for a war everyone hoped would never come. At the center of it all stood Admiral Elena Ward. She remained motionless on the command deck of the Resolute, humanity's most advanced flagship, as enormous observation windows overlooked the pale gold horizon of Saturn. The planet's rings stretched across space like rivers of shattered crystal, glowing softly beneath distant sunlight. It would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Instead, every reflection carried the weight of approaching catastrophe. Around her, the bridge hummed with disciplined urgency. Officers moved between holographic consoles displaying tactical projections of the solar system. Thousands of blue markers identified hidden fleets waiting under strict radio silence. Quantum communication channels flickered continuously as encrypted orders flowed between Earth, Mars, Luna, and dozens of classified defense stations buried throughout the outer planets. No voices were raised. No panic filled the room. Years of preparation had replaced fear with focus. Elena folded her hands behind her back, staring into the endless darkness beyond Saturn. "They're coming," a young sensor officer whispered, almost to himself. "I know," she answered quietly. She had spent her entire career studying the Eternal Empire. Every surviving fragment of intelligence. Every recovered battlefield recording. Every testimony from refugee civilizations that had escaped annihilation by impossible luck. One lesson echoed through every report. The Empire believed fear was stronger than resistance. It believed overwhelming force guaranteed obedience. It believed every species eventually broke. Humanity intended to prove that assumption fatal. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Long-range sensors had detected gravitational distortions near the edge of the heliosphere. Tiny at first. Barely measurable. Yet every officer on the bridge understood what those distortions meant. Massive hyperspace transitions. Not one ship. Thousands. The invasion had entered the solar system. Instead of issuing frantic commands, Admiral Ward slowly activated a concealed tactical interface embedded beneath the command rail. Instantly, hundreds of classified installations illuminated across the star map. Hidden railgun platforms buried inside asteroids. Autonomous drone swarms concealed within comet clouds. Planetary defense arrays disguised as civilian infrastructure. Entire reserve fleets waiting beneath electromagnetic camouflage. None of it had ever appeared on public records. None of it had ever been shown to alien observers. Humanity had never been racing to build an empire. It had been building a trap. Elena allowed herself one final glance toward the blue glow of distant Earth, hanging impossibly small against the infinite black. Somewhere on that fragile world, billions of ordinary people continued their lives, trusting strangers like her to ensure they would still have a tomorrow. She drew a slow breath. Then, without hesitation, she gave the order that generations had prayed would never be necessary. "Wake the fleet." Across the solar system, silent giants opened their eyes. The first ships appeared as tiny fractures in the fabric of space itself. At the outer edge of the solar system, beyond the icy silence where sunlight was little more than a pale memory, the darkness began to ripple. One distortion became 10. 10 became hundreds. Then the void split open completely. Gigantic hyperspace gates blossomed across millions of kilometers, glowing with cold sapphire light as vessels of impossible scale emerged one after another. Their silhouettes eclipsed distant stars, each warship wrapped in armor that shimmered like black obsidian beneath the faint rays of the sun. The Imperial Armada had arrived, not as a fleet, but as an entire civilization at war. Sensors across human space screamed in unison. Every observatory, defense platform, and command center watched the same horrifying image unfold. The stars were disappearing behind metal. Within minutes, the Emperor's final transmission echoed through every secured military frequency and civilian network alike. The message carried no emotion, only the detached certainty of an execution already decided. Your refusal has been acknowledged. Deliver all assigned tribute immediately. Transfer industrial assets, strategic resources, and 10 million human citizens for Imperial service. Resistance will result in planetary liquidation. The words reverberated through homes, hospitals, orbital stations, and Martian colonies with chilling clarity. There was no countdown. No room for diplomacy. The Empire had spoken as though humanity's fate had already been written centuries ago. Fear spread faster than light could. On Europa, technicians abandoned maintenance corridors to embrace their families before emergency bulkheads sealed shut. In the floating cities above Venus, children looked through reinforced glass toward the distant sky, too young to understand why adults suddenly wore expressions they had never seen before. Emergency sirens rolled across Earth's continents like distant thunder, while evacuation trains disappeared beneath mountains into shelters that had remained unopened for generations. Markets emptied. Religious temples filled. Across thousands of orbital habitats, windows dimmed automatically as civilians watched encrypted news feeds showing the endless stream of Imperial vessels crossing into human space. Yet inside military headquarters, something unexpected happened. Nobody panicked. Instead, officers calmly opened sealed vaults that had gathered dust for decades. Classified protocols, designed by people long dead, were finally unlocked. Quantum processors activated hidden defense networks buried beneath civilian infrastructure. Scientists who had spent entire careers dismissed as theoretical researchers quietly entered secure laboratories and powered up machines the public had never known existed. Massive fusion reactors beneath the moon roared to life, drawing enough energy to illuminate continents. Across Mars, autonomous factories shifted from civilian manufacturing to uninterrupted wartime production, assembling drones, ammunition, and replacement starfighter components without a single human hand touching the assembly lines. The Empire interpreted the silence as surrender. Humanity interpreted it as preparation. Admiral Elena Ward stood before a tactical display stretching across the bridge of the Resolute. Thousands of crimson symbols representing enemy warships continued multiplying until entire sectors of the map vanished beneath their numbers. Even veteran commanders stared at the display with quiet disbelief. The Imperial fleet outnumbered every known human vessel many times over. By every conventional calculation, defeat was inevitable. A junior officer finally broke the silence. "Admiral, if they have this many ships..." His voice trembled before he forced himself to continue. "How do we stop them?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched another classified notification appear across the holographic display. Project Aegis. Project Long Night. Project Firebreak. One by one, decades of contingency plans awakened from dormancy. She looked around the bridge, not at frightened faces, but determined ones. Engineers, navigators, pilots, analysts, ordinary people who had quietly accepted that history had chosen them for this moment. They think fear is our weakness, she said softly. Her words spread across the bridge until every conversation stopped. They've mistaken it for discipline. Outside the observation window, the Imperial Armada advanced like an unstoppable storm swallowing the stars themselves. But behind humanity's calm, something far more dangerous had already begun to move. The Eternal Empire expected its first victory before the opening shot had even been fired. As the Imperial Armada crossed the invisible boundary into the inner solar system, countless admirals watched tactical displays with quiet confidence. Their simulations all reached the same conclusion. Earth would defend its homeworld. Mars would protect its colonies. Human fleets would scatter into desperate pockets of resistance before being systematically destroyed. It was the pattern the Empire had witnessed thousands of times across 10 millennia of conquest. Every civilization clung to its worlds. Every civilization fought where it was strongest. Every civilization eventually broke. The invasion had become routine. Then the solar system went silent. No defensive formations rushed toward the Imperial advance. No desperate distress calls echoed through space. Planetary shields remained inactive. Even Earth's orbital defenses appeared strangely undermanned. Confused murmurs spread through Imperial command vessels as sensor arrays searched for humanity's missing fleet. Had they fled? Had they surrendered at the last moment? The absence of resistance felt unnatural, like walking into a city where every street was empty moments before dawn. Then reality itself unfolded. Without warning, space erupted with rings of blinding white light. They did not resemble hyperspace gates or any known method of faster-than-light travel. These structures were different, perfect circles of shimmering quantum energy stretching hundreds of kilometers across, suspended in absolute silence. One appeared behind the Imperial vanguard. Then another above it. Dozens more ignited throughout the battlefield until the darkness resembled a celestial machine awakening from a 1,000-year sleep. From each gateway emerged human warships. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Entire battle groups. Carriers, destroyers, missile cruisers, drone tenders, and massive fortress ships poured from impossible directions simultaneously, materializing where no fleet should have been able to exist. Every arrival violated Imperial assumptions about distance, logistics, and strategy. Before enemy commanders could comprehend what they were witnessing, tactical projections became meaningless. Human forces were everywhere. Admiral Elena Ward watched from the bridge of the Resolute as the first phase of Project Horizon unfolded exactly as generations of engineers had envisioned. For more than 2 centuries, humanity had secretly constructed an interlinked lattice of stabilized quantum corridors hidden beyond conventional space. The planets had never been intended as the true defensive line. They were only landmarks surrounding an invisible battlefield that humanity alone could navigate. But the greatest surprise had not yet arrived. Encrypted signals burst outward through the quantum network, racing beyond the solar system at impossible speed. Across the galaxy, receivers hidden inside forgotten mining stations, abandoned observatories, and ancient refugee settlements awakened after decades of silence. The message contained no speech. Only a single authentication code followed by 2 words. Freedom begins. In an instant, occupied space erupted. On worlds the Empire believed completely pacified, underground resistance cells emerged from hiding. Weapons concealed for generations were unearthed. Orbital defense platforms abruptly turned their cannons toward Imperial garrisons. Prison moons revolted. Supply depots exploded. Shipyards stopped producing vessels for the Empire and began launching them against their former masters. Species that had spent centuries pretending obedience cast away fear in a single breathtaking moment. The Empire finally understood the terrible truth. Humanity had not spent 2 centuries preparing to defend Earth. It had spent 2 centuries building an alliance no one could see. Every refugee rescued in secret. Every scientist quietly relocated from conquered worlds. Every encrypted transmission hidden beneath ordinary commerce. Every act of compassion dismissed by the Empire as weakness. It had all been part of the same design. The tribute system that had sustained imperial dominance for 10,000 years had unknowingly financed a rebellion stretching across thousands of star systems. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Ward watched countless red enemy markers begin disappearing from the galactic map, not because they had been destroyed, but because entire sectors had risen against them. For the first time in its endless history, the Eternal Empire realized it had not invaded a single defiant species. It had marched directly into the opening move of a war humanity had already spent generations preparing to win. The first shot of the war did not sound like thunder. In the vacuum of space, it arrived in absolute silence. A tungsten lance, accelerated to unimaginable velocity by hidden magnetic accelerators buried within an asteroid, crossed millions of kilometers in a heartbeat. It struck the lead Imperial dreadnought just beneath its forward shield lattice. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the colossal vessel split cleanly down its center, glowing white-hot from within before erupting into a storm of molten armor and shattered debris. Across the Imperial command network, silence replaced certainty. For the first time in 10,000 years, an Imperial flagship had fallen in the opening exchange of a battle. That single strike became humanity's signal. The darkness exploded with movement. From concealed bays inside Saturn's rings, sleek human carriers surged forward, releasing millions of autonomous combat drones that scattered like metallic swarms of starlings. Each machine carried adaptive intelligence capable of rewriting its own tactics in real time. When Imperial targeting systems learned one attack pattern, the drones evolved another. Laser batteries swept through space in brilliant crimson arcs, vaporizing thousands at a time, yet every destroyed drone was instantly replaced by two more emerging from hidden fabrication ships positioned safely beyond the battlefield. To the Empire, it felt less like fighting machines and more like struggling against a living storm. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Elena Ward watched tactical displays flicker with impossible speed. Blue icons representing Allied fleets appeared and disappeared as quantum corridors redirected forces across the battlefield in seconds. Every captain fought as part of a single mind, linked through quantum communication faster than thought itself. Orders were barely spoken before they became reality. Enemy formation Delta is collapsing. Redirect 5th Carrier Group. Gravity trap armed. Execute. There was no hesitation. Only precision. Far beyond the front lines, engineers inside disguised mining stations activated devices that had remained hidden for generations. Massive gravitational anchors awakened beneath the surfaces of seemingly lifeless moons. Ancient asteroids shifted from their natural orbits as gigantic fusion engines ignited deep within their cores. The solar system itself began to move. Imperial navigators stared in horror as local gravity fields twisted beyond prediction. Escape routes folded inward. Hyperspace calculations failed. Entire fleets suddenly found themselves trapped inside invisible wells where faster-than-light drive simply refused to function. The battlefield had become a prison designed centuries before the Empire even knew humanity existed. Still, the invaders refused to surrender. Towering Imperial battle platforms unleashed beams capable of slicing through mountains. Human cruisers vanished beneath blinding explosions. Escape pods scattered across the void while rescue craft plunged directly into the crossfire without waiting for orders. Civilian volunteers aboard logistics ships abandoned safe positions to recover wounded crews under relentless bombardment. Scientists who had never held weapons rewrote targeting algorithms from underground command bunkers, finding microscopic weaknesses inside Imperial shield harmonics and transmitting updates to every Allied vessel in real time. Across every battlefield, soldiers, engineers, doctors, programmers, and ordinary citizens fought together with the same determination. Admiral Ward looked across the bridge. Some officers were bleeding. Others hadn't slept for nearly 2 days. Not one asked permission to leave. The Imperial flagship finally emerged through the chaos, dwarfing every vessel around it like a moving continent wrapped in obsidian armor. Thousands of escort ships surrounded it in concentric defensive rings. At its center pulsed the command nexus controlling nearly every Imperial fleet in known space. A direct assault bordered on suicide. Elena knew it. Her crew knew it. No one objected. She opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice remained calm despite the fire raging beyond the observation deck. We were never fighting because we wanted revenge. Images of occupied worlds filled every display, children growing up beneath occupation, cities stripped of their future, entire civilizations forced to exist only to feed an empire. We fight so no child, on any world, is ever born believing freedom has a price. The transmission ended. Hundreds of human ships accelerated together. Rebel fleets emerged from quantum corridors behind them. A unified spear of light pierced the Imperial formation. Moments later, the Emperor's command flagship disappeared inside a blinding sphere of white energy that outshone the sun itself. Then, across thousands of star systems, every Imperial command signal simply went dark. When the last echoes of battle faded into the endless silence of space, the galaxy waited for history to repeat itself. Across thousands of liberated worlds, people looked toward Earth with the same mixture of fear and resignation they had once reserved for the Eternal Empire. They had seen this story before. One empire fell, another rose to claim the throne. Victory always demanded payment. Conquerors always rewrote the rules in their own favor. Mothers gathered their children close, expecting new banners to replace the old ones. Governors prepared surrender documents before anyone had even asked for them. Refugee fleets drifted cautiously between ruined star systems, wondering which master they would be forced to serve next. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, as though the universe expected humanity to seize the crown left behind by the fallen emperor. But the order never came. Instead of occupying worlds, human fleets scattered across the scarred frontier carrying supplies instead of soldiers. The immense carriers that had unleashed swarms of war drones now deployed hospitals, atmospheric processors, and construction platforms. Orbital shipyards that had spent months forging weapons shifted overnight to manufacturing agricultural stations, power grids, and habitat modules. Human engineers landed on planets they had never seen before, working beside exhausted local populations to restore collapsed fusion reactors and purify poisoned oceans. Medical teams crossed battle lines without asking which side civilians had once belonged to. Former enemies and former allies received the same treatment. To humanity, suffering required no political allegiance. Admiral Elena Ward watched the transformation from the observation deck of the Resolute as relief convoys disappeared into the darkness one after another. The tactical displays that had once glowed crimson with enemy formations now filled with navigation routes for humanitarian missions stretching across thousands of light years. She felt the exhaustion settle into her bones, heavier than any gravity well she had ever crossed. The war had been won, but victory carried its own weight. Every blue marker on the screen represented lives still waiting to be rebuilt. Every silent world represented families searching through ruins for someone who would never return. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the countless faces lost during the campaign, pilots who never returned to their carriers, engineers who remained inside collapsing stations to buy others time, civilians who had volunteered knowing they might never see home again. Their sacrifice deserved more than celebration. It deserved a future worthy of what they had given. Months passed. Then years. Across former imperial territory, monuments rose not to glorify humanity's military power, but to remember every civilization that had resisted tyranny long before Earth ever reached the stars. The chains of tribute disappeared from law, from commerce, and eventually from memory itself. Ancient border checkpoints became centers of trade. Fortress worlds became universities where scientists from hundreds of species shared discoveries without fear of confiscation. Children born after the war grew up hearing stories that sounded impossible, that there had once been an age when entire planets paid taxes simply for the privilege of existing. To them, freedom was as ordinary as breathing. They could not imagine a universe where hope required permission. One quiet evening, decades after the final battle, Admiral Ward, older now, her hair silver beneath the soft light of Earth's restored orbital gardens, stood before a gathering of students representing dozens of worlds. Some had scales that shimmered like gemstones. Others carried wings folded neatly behind their backs. Some looked almost human. Others seemed sculpted from living crystal. They listened in complete silence as one child raised a simple question. Were humans stronger than the Empire? Elena smiled gently. No, she answered. We were simply unwilling to believe that fear was stronger than freedom. The child nodded thoughtfully, as though the answer explained everything. Far beyond Earth, where the remains of the Imperial flagship still drifted through the silent void, stars slowly formed new constellations around fields of forgotten wreckage. Travelers passing that place often shut down their engines for a moment of quiet reflection. There was no monument. No throne. No victory inscription carved into stone. Only silence. And within that silence lived a truth that echoed farther than any empire ever could. The day humanity refused to pay tribute, it did more than win a war. It reminded an entire galaxy that freedom is never a gift from the powerful. It is a choice, defended by those brave enough to stand when everyone else kneels.